Sustainable policies. Well, I think one of the first things we should say is that actually mobility is a good thing. I think one of the key things that, and Jonathan highlighted it, that transport has increased in terms of its impact in the UK carbon. That's predominantly, or I think actually entirely, due to increasing activity. And to deliver a number of those goals, those sustainable development goals, reduced inequality, access to education, work, and a number of those key goals require mobility. So mobility in and of itself is a good thing, but there's no doubt that we've got to try and solve some of the challenges that it also poses for us. So I was asked initially I was invited to come and talk about sustainable vehicles, sustainable vehicle conference. And great, excellent. Sustainable vehicles, they're quite sexy. And we can talk about the things that have been happening over the last 10 years. I've just tried to pick out a couple of examples there. There's a Lotus made from hemp and sisal panels, really sustainable constructs. And that was 10 years ago. We've got dramatic electric vehicles now, electric trucks, zero-emission trucks. We've got examples from the automotive sector, the manufacturing sector, of some really good practice in adopting renewable technology and renewable energy and reducing the impact of the production of vehicles. We've also got things like renewable fuels. The bus there, I won't refer to its full title, but the bus there is obviously an example of using biomethane in transport and reducing the impact. And of course, examples of hypermiling from the Shell Eco Marathon, and indeed the last phase in our automotive life, if you like, the recycling. Again, examples there from Nissan of using second life of their batteries. So the automotive industry is definitely inspiring and moving and really driving sustainability across its whole life chain. But I wasn't asked to talk about sustainable vehicles. I was asked to talk about regulations and taxation. I think if I can plagiarise Benjamin Franklin, who said, I think there are only two certainties in life, death and taxes. Or I'd like to add another one to that. Right now, and we heard from Jonathan, there's three certainties: death, taxes, and climate change. Now, we're working on climate change. Taxes probably are in our behest as well. Death is a more challenging one, but it's not beyond the realms of. So we are working on these things. But I think the key thing I wanted to say is that regulations and taxes can actually be forces for good. They can definitely drive innovation. They can protect the consumers. They can help us deliver our objectives in a manageable way and actually really drive the common understanding. It's all very well sat here and stood here talking to the learned people who understand these challenges, but the man in the street, the woman in the street, really trying to get them to engage with some of these issues. The best way to do that is through some fairly forthright taxes and potentially regulation. And I saw regulation and taxes as really being, if I can call it, one of the key stimulation activities for sustainability. In fact, to the extent I was going to call this talk a sustainable stimulation, but then I looked at what happened when you Googled that and decided I would talk about sustainable policies instead. So let's talk about regulation taxation. Let's understand a little bit where we are right now. And at the moment, our current vehicles, we actually look at their direct use, the impact of the vehicles, and that really is 80% of its impact on the global climate is through the use of those vehicles. We obviously tax the vehicle against how efficient it is, its CO2, its fuel economy level, if you like. We also tax and regulate the emissions that come from the tailpipe. And clearly that's a key focus for us at the moment, rightly so, for all the reasons that we understand. And then we obviously tax the fuel, the energy that you put into that vehicle. And then we actually tax the tax as well through VAT. So we're going to get you one way or another, but arguably fuel tax is the most powerful one and is really a proxy for taxing the use of the vehicle. And it's a relatively effective one, encouraging people to reduce both their use, the way they drive, the amount they drive, and to select a more efficient vehicle are all fairly well delivered through a progressive or even a non-progressive fuel taxation structure. But let's now think about the future. Let's think about our zero emissions, our zero tailpipe future, the sort of utopian future of electrification or zero emissions of all of our transport system, even aviation, arguably. So we've got our zero emissions vehicle. Great example here, the Nissan Leaf, obviously a UK success story. There's no emissions. Excellent. Great. We don't have to worry about regulating those emissions, and we don't have to tax its CO2. It actually pays zero VED. It's a really efficient vehicle, zero carbon, zero tailpipe emissions, so we don't pay any VED, and that's been guaranteed for the next few years. The fuel we use, electricity. There's no road fuel duty on electricity. You might pay a little bit of 5% VAT on your electricity domestically, but actually if you're generating it with solar panels, you could probably run your vehicle for free. So actually, we've got this beautiful solution that our regulation and taxation policy really doesn't yet understand and accommodate. And we have lost the levers to encourage some of the key behaviours on managing use, using your energy efficiently, thinking about your mobility and how you apply that and the tools you use for mobility, mass transit. If you've got a zero-emission vehicle, albeit we are all here, I suggest, working towards this probably as fast as possible, and I think you'll hear later about how we maybe need to speed that up. But we've got a real problem here in terms of the way we tax and the way we generate revenue from our road transport system. So we have to start thinking about the whole life impact of our vehicles. And this is already going on. This is already underway. So we have our vehicle at the centre of this and our use, and we've established that our use now has, arguably, it could have zero impact on the climate, zero tailpipe emissions and renewable electricity generation. But the production of the vehicle clearly has a significant impact. And potentially that could now be, in current climate and current UK grid electricity, that could be 50% of your life cycle impact. So we have to look at that. We have to look at particularly the batteries, and we've already referred to those. We've got to look at the energy source that we use as well. And at the moment, there's a certain proportion of electricity generated from fossil fuels, of course. And for that, we do have the ability to look at that and manage that and understand the emissions there. But when we go to renewable fuels, or indeed domestically and therefore potentially free to the user, it's a very different story. So we've got to think about how we're going to approach these things. And one of the first things we've got to do is understand how we're going to measure it. We can't regulate, we can't tax, we can't generate revenue, we can't actually steer behaviour unless we can understand what the impacts are. So measurement, and that's where it comes to engineering. And as an engineer by trade, I advocate engineering-based policy throughout this. And engineering-based taxation would be a very, very sound thing as well, in my view. But as long as we can measure things and understand them, then we have an opportunity to try and steer the behaviours. And I think if we look to the future, we actually have an opportunity here for a mobility system, and this was announced only yesterday, I think, the day before yesterday, a mobility system that has zero tailpipe, potentially zero impact on the renewable energy that's being put into it, and zero driver in the vehicle. So all of the levers to try and generate revenue or to highlight the cost of operating that vehicle have been removed. An autonomous, renewably powered vehicle doesn't leave us many tools in the box. And the danger is, if we don't get a handle on this, we could end up getting profligate use of those vehicles. And if we only look at life cycle impact of a vehicle, if we take a very simplistic view and look at grams per kilometre of its life, you'd generate an argument for driving these more and more and more to get that grams per kilometre down. So we have to be sensible about the way we look at these things, how we measure, and how we assess future policy. And we are already doing that. Life cycle analysis is already on the table within the European Union. We don't know all of the answers, and we haven't got all of the solutions to how that should be applied, but we're certainly working on it. Some of my learned friends around the room here are actively working on low-impact batteries, low impact production, and indeed, of course, low impact energy. All of these things are under increasing scrutiny, and transport sits right squarely at the centre of this and touches everybody's life. So I'd like to leave you with this point, that good regulation and good taxation actually can be a stimulus for the benefit of us, for the benefit of our life, and actually it can protect our future rather than cause us pain in the short term. Thank you.